The Galactic Council sat in their chamber, discussing a matter that had recently become a source of concern for many of their member species: humanity. While relatively new to the interstellar stage, humans had been observed in various conflicts over the years, mostly minor territorial disputes and trade negotiations. What had unnerved the Council was not humanity's initial reluctance to engage in war, but what happened once they were pushed to that point. The pattern was unmistakable. Once provoked into conflict, humans didn't just retaliate, they escalated. And every time, they adapted, overcoming odds that would have broken most other species. "We have seen what happens when humans are cornered," one representative said, his tone grim. "Their ingenuity, their ability to rally under pressure, it's unlike anything we've encountered. They don't stop. Once they start fighting, it's only a matter of time before they win." The discussion that followed was tense, as members of the Council debated the best course of action. Some believed that diplomacy was still the best option, that humans could be reasoned with, kept in check through negotiation and trade. Others were less optimistic. They feared that allowing humanity too much freedom would only lead to disaster, for the humans, once provoked, would become unstoppable. The stories from those who had encountered human forces firsthand were filled with awe and fear, tales of humans turning impossible odds in their favor, of their soldiers refusing to surrender, of their engineers creating weapons out of scraps, of their leaders strategizing in ways that were unpredictable and devastating. A consensus was reached. The Council agreed that humanity must be kept in line, but with extreme caution. A new decree was issued: under no circumstances should humans be allowed to start a war. If they did, it would lead to untold destruction, not only for the species they fought, but potentially for the entire Council. Containment was the key. Ensure that no conflict ever grew to the point where humans felt they had to unleash their full potential. The decree, though unspoken beyond the Council's chambers, was felt across the galaxy. Representatives from various species began to test the limits of the humans, subtly at first, small incursions into their territories, provocations meant to gauge their reactions. A skirmish here, a trade dispute there. The humans, true to form, responded diplomatically, seeking to resolve the issues peacefully. Earth's leaders, aware of the fragility of their place among the galactic powers, avoided open conflict, choosing instead to reinforce alliances and strengthen economic ties. But beneath the surface, tensions were rising. The provocations escalated. Alien fleets patrolled closer to human space, violating neutral zones with increasing frequency. Trade agreements were renegotiated with more aggressive terms, aimed at squeezing humanity into submission. And then the attacks began. First, a few unclaimed moons, outposts barely within human jurisdiction, were raided by alien forces seeking to assert dominance. Earth lodged complaints through official channels, demanding a stop to the incursions, but the Council did nothing. It was clear they had no intention of intervening. Within human leadership, frustration grew. Publicly, Earth continued to preach diplomacy and patience, but privately, the military began preparing for what they knew was inevitable. The provocations were no longer random acts of aggression. They were coordinated efforts to see how far humanity could be pushed before they broke. And the Council, watching from afar, remained silent, content to let the situation play out. The breaking point came when a human colony on the fringes of explored space was attacked. It wasn't just a raid this time, it was a massacre. Civilians were slaughtered, their homes burned, their lives torn apart. The attackers, a coalition of species looking to make a statement, retreated before Earth could respond. The message was clear: humanity was not welcome in certain parts of the galaxy, and they were expected to fall in line. But humanity didn't fall in line. The massacre was too much. The Council had miscalculated, thinking that humans, outnumbered and outgunned, would do what so many other species had done before them: fold, submit, retreat. They were wrong. What the Council had failed to understand was that humans did not see war as a tool for expansion or conquest. For them, it was personal. When provoked, they didn't fight for territory or resources. They fought for survival, for revenge, for justice. Earth's leaders convened, and the decision was made. The diplomatic overtures had failed. The Council had turned a blind eye to the provocations, and now, humanity would respond. Quietly, without fanfare, preparations for war began. It wasn't a public declaration of hostilities, not yet. Humanity wasn't about to play into the Council's hands by openly declaring war. Instead, they would strike where their enemies least expected it, using the time they had left to gather intelligence, form alliances, and prepare their forces for a conflict unlike any they had fought before. The Council, still believing they had humanity under control, was oblivious to what was happening on Earth. They continued their provocations, even as human military forces began to mobilize in secret. Factories across the planet shifted production to focus on war material, reverse engineering alien technology to create weapons and defenses that could give them an edge. Scientists and engineers worked around the clock, developing new tactics and technologies, preparing for the inevitable conflict. Every resource was dedicated to the cause, every citizen ready to defend their homeworld. Behind the scenes, Earth's military command launched a series of covert operations, gathering intelligence on the Council's forces and their weaknesses. They didn't need to start the war on a grand scale, they just needed the right moment, the right target, and the right plan. Once the first strike was made, the Council would understand the gravity of their mistake. For now, humanity played along, continuing to speak the language of diplomacy while their true intentions remained hidden. The Council, comfortable in their perceived superiority, remained blind to the storm that was brewing. They had told themselves that humanity could be controlled, that they were just another species to be manipulated and pushed around. But they had forgotten the most important lesson: once humans start a war, they finish it. And when they finish it, no one is left standing. Humanity's response to the Council's provocations was methodical and silent, their true intentions hidden behind diplomatic smiles and formal statements. The world's best scientists and engineers were pulled from every field, their minds focused entirely on one goal: to weaponize everything they had learned about alien technology and tactics. Reverse engineering became an art form as alien machinery, once captured in battle or salvaged from wreckage, was systematically dismantled, analyzed, and reassembled with terrifying improvements. Plasma weapons were reconfigured for higher yield and accuracy. Alien shielding technology was adapted, producing a new generation of human warships capable of withstanding previously insurmountable attacks. Espionage took on a new role as well. Humanity's intelligence network was sharpened, sending operatives to alien worlds under the guise of trade envoys and diplomatic aides. Their mission was to observe, learn, and report on the internal structure of the Council and its weaknesses. What they found was revealing. Alien governments functioned with rigid hierarchies, each species' military forces locked into centuries-old traditions and tactics. The Council relied on these structures to maintain order, but humanity recognized them as vulnerabilities. In Earth's war rooms, these reports were dissected and analyzed, forming the basis for a new type of strategy, one that would exploit the Council's inflexible command systems and their deep-rooted assumptions about superiority. The united front that emerged across Earth was unprecedented. Every government, every organization that had once competed for power or influence, set aside their differences in the face of this common threat. Civilian industries pivoted overnight, redirecting manufacturing lines to produce weapons, armor, and new fleet components. The global population, once divided by borders and ideologies, now stood unified, ready to fight for survival. Military training was ramped up, with recruits undergoing rigorous drills that emphasized resilience and adaptability. Soldiers were taught to operate in diverse environments, to improvise, to think for themselves, a stark contrast to the Council's soldiers, who relied on centralized commands. In the heart of these preparations lay Earth's new fleets. Rather than building massive dreadnoughts to match the Council's imposing ships, human engineers focused on speed, maneuverability, and stealth. Small, agile craft outfitted with advanced cloaking devices were designed to strike quickly and vanish before the enemy could respond. Human pilots trained extensively, learning the precise timing and tactics needed for hit-and-run operations. They understood that their advantage wasn't in size or firepower but in the element of surprise and flexibility. ground forces evolved as well. Special operations units were outfitted with newly developed exoskeletons that amplified their physical abilities, allowing them to carry heavier gear and move with unparalleled agility. These soldiers were equipped with weaponry that had been enhanced with alien technologies, but redesigned for the specific needs of human combat. Armor was infused with lightweight, shock-resistant materials, giving troops both protection and mobility. But more than the equipment, it was the training that set these forces apart. Every soldier learned to adapt to any environment, to use unconventional tactics, to operate independently. The Council's forces had strength in numbers, but humanity was training for precision and impact. As preparations advanced, Earth's leaders were careful to project an image of compliance. Trade continued as usual, with human diplomats maintaining the appearance of cooperation and deference. Reports were strategically leaked to imply that Earth was recovering slowly from the provocations, that its people were weary and willing to negotiate for peace. Behind the scenes, however, Earth's military command was finalizing their plans. They knew that deception would be their greatest ally. The Council had assumed humanity would respond to a direct challenge with brute force, not with subterfuge. Earth's leaders intended to exploit that assumption to the fullest. The final pieces fell into place as human intelligence operatives, working in tandem with the military, identified strategic weaknesses within the Council's communication networks. Earth's best hackers and programmers worked in secrecy, developing viruses and infiltration programs designed to cripple the Council's systems. This was not a campaign to destroy their enemies outright but to dismantle their ability to coordinate, to sow confusion and fear among their ranks. By the time humanity struck, they planned to have every advantage: control over the battlefield, superior intelligence, and the element of total surprise. The leaders of Earth gathered one last time before setting their plans into motion. It was an unspoken understanding among them that they were about to defy the Council's decree in the most profound way. They were not just starting a war, they were preparing to end one, permanently. The stakes were clear: if they failed, humanity would face annihilation. But if they succeeded, they would carve out a place for themselves in the galaxy, free from the Council's dominance. Final orders were issued to every division, every fleet, every soldier. Intelligence reports were updated, strategies reviewed, contingencies put in place. Humanity's leaders knew that they could not afford any mistakes. They had spent years studying their enemies, preparing not just to match the Council's forces but to surpass them. Every battle, every move would be precise, calculated, and devastating. Humanity had been patient, preparing in silence, and now the time had come to show the Council what it meant to provoke a force that refused to be subjugated. They would not wait for permission to defend their own. They would claim their right to exist, to stand as equals in the galaxy. The Council had issued their decree, but humanity was about to rewrite it in fire and steel. The moment had come, and Earth was ready. With every preparation complete, humanity's forces were unleashed in a blitz of precision and force. The first strike hit a series of Council outposts in rapid succession, each targeted for its strategic importance. Human fleets, outfitted with cloaking technology and enhanced propulsion systems, appeared suddenly on the Council's radar only moments before striking. The aliens, accustomed to lumbering ships with heavy armament, couldn't match the speed and maneuverability of Earth's new crafts. Stations that had been guarded for centuries fell within hours, their defenses rendered useless against the relentless assault. Reports of the attack surged through the Council's communication networks, spreading confusion and fear. Humanity's tactics were unlike anything the Council had ever encountered. The strikes were surgical, each one carefully planned to hit weak points in the Council's logistical and supply chains. Essential routes were cut off, starports rendered inoperative, and fleet stations reduced to debris. But it wasn't just the physical damage that shook the Council. It was the realization that humans had struck first, breaking through Council territory with an audacity no other species had dared. Council commanders scrambled to respond, calling fleets from neighboring sectors to reinforce the ravaged areas. But these fleets, designed for large-scale engagements, were slow, their weaponry optimized for predictable combat scenarios. Human ships, smaller and faster, flitted in and out of battle like shadows, disappearing just as quickly as they had arrived. The Council's strength had always been an overwhelming force, but now that strength became a weakness. Every massive dreadnought and heavy cruiser was outpaced by swarms of nimble human fighters, which targeted critical systems, disabled engines, and left the Council's ships stranded and vulnerable. The psychological impact of these attacks was immediate. For centuries, the Council had held an unchallenged position of authority, their fleets a symbol of absolute power. Now, the sight of broken stations and stranded ships painted a different picture, one of weakness and vulnerability. Across Council territory, panic spread among the alien populations. Their protectors had been exposed, their once mighty forces bested by the very species they had dismissed as a minor threat. News channels broadcast scenes of destruction and evacuation as citizens realized that the Council was no longer able to guarantee their safety. Meanwhile, Earth's forces pressed their advantage. Each engagement taught them more about the Council's defensive strategies, revealing further weaknesses to exploit. Human commanders, drawing on intelligence from prior skirmishes and newly gathered data, adjusted tactics with every encounter. Council ships attempted to form defensive perimeters, relying on brute force, but human forces adapted. They attacked from unexpected angles, coordinated strikes in seemingly random sequences, and manipulated their enemies into spreading their defenses too thin. As Earth's fleets advanced, they continued to send a clear message: humanity would not be contained, controlled, or subjugated. To drive this point home, human leaders broadcast their victories across the galaxy, showing footage of Council forces in retreat, Council worlds under siege. Humanity wasn't just winning battles, they were shaping the narrative, turning the Council's fear into an unstoppable wave of doubt and panic. Alien societies, once unwaveringly loyal to the Council, began questioning the security it claimed to provide. Rumors of human resilience and technological prowess spread like wildfire, sparking fear in Council member species who had once believed themselves invincible. In a desperate attempt to reclaim control, the Council pulled forces from its core systems to reinforce the failing front lines. Massive dreadnoughts, loaded with devastating weaponry, were deployed with orders to crush humanity's uprising. But human intelligence operatives had anticipated this move, tracking the movements of these powerful ships long before they reached Earth's fleets. Rather than facing them head-on, humanity employed tactics designed to isolate and neutralize the dreadnoughts' support networks. Supply lines were ambushed, communications were severed, and reinforcements were misled through falsified coordinates. By the time the dreadnoughts reached their intended destinations, they found themselves without fuel, without support, and without orders. Isolated, they became easy prey for human strike teams that quickly disabled their engines and weapons. Humanity had turned the Council's most fearsome assets into stranded relics, symbols of a once unquestioned authority now rendered impotent by the relentless human assault. Every lost dreadnought, every fallen station, became another example of humanity's tactical brilliance. Alien commanders, struggling to understand how their mighty fleets were being dismantled, began to falter. Their strategies, rigid and deeply rooted in centuries of tradition, failed them in the face of humanity's constant adaptation. Attempts to regroup and mount a counteroffensive were undermined by misinformation and relentless attacks. Human hackers infiltrated Council communication networks, spreading false orders and sowing further confusion among the alien ranks. Commands were issued to non-existent fleets, reinforcements directed to ambushes, and false reports of human strikes in distant sectors kept the Council off balance. The Council soldiers, accustomed to fighting with overwhelming numbers, were left scattered and directionless. Back on Earth, the human leadership observed these developments with grim satisfaction. They knew that this war was no longer about holding the line or defending their borders. They had shattered the Council's facade of invincibility, and now the Council's forces were on the run. What had begun as a retaliatory response had evolved into a campaign of dominance. Humanity was no longer just fighting to survive, they were systematically dismantling the very structure of power that had oppressed them. As the final battles raged on the Council's fringes, Earth's forces pushed forward, extending their reach deeper into alien territories. The Council's leaders, once confident and untouchable, were now forced into hiding, desperate to avoid the fate of their fallen allies. Every attempt to rally was met with swift, brutal retaliation from human forces that seemed to predict their every move. Alien societies, witnessing the Council's defeat, began to distance themselves, withdrawing support, and in some cases, even allying with humanity. The galaxy's power structure had shifted, and humanity now stood at its center. In the end, the Council had miscalculated. They had believed that humanity's reluctance to start a war was a sign of weakness. They had mistaken patience for fear, diplomacy for compliance. And in doing so, they had set into motion their own undoing. Humanity had proven not just that they could fight but that they could win, decisively and ruthlessly. The Council had become a symbol of arrogance and failure, and humanity had claimed its place as a force to be reckoned with. As the dust settled, the message became clear to every species watching from the sidelines: never let humans start a war. The Council's once unbreakable grip on the galaxy was shattered. Humanity's campaign had pushed them to the brink, with Earth's forces advancing relentlessly, dismantling Council outposts, severing supply lines, and systematically dismantling every defense in their path. Alien fleets scrambled to regroup, but the Council's once mighty armada was now a scattered collection of damaged ships, low on resources and morale, spread thin across sectors they could no longer hold. Each attempt to form a defensive line was met with swift and devastating attacks, as human forces anticipated their moves and struck before they could rally. Earth's fleets, having gained experience and sharpened tactics with each engagement, now moved with an efficiency that left even their own commanders impressed. Human pilots, once outnumbered and outgunned, maneuvered their advanced craft with precision, striking fear into the Council's forces. Every human victory was another crack in the Council's foundation, another sign to the galaxy that the old order was crumbling. Council leaders, facing the reality that they had lost control, began to panic. Desperation set in, with some calling for negotiations, others attempting to flee to safe zones that no longer existed. The galaxy had changed, and there was no longer a place for the complacent arrogance that had once ruled it. Humanity's advance was not only physical but psychological. Council territories began to erupt in unrest as citizens, once loyal, questioned why they should continue sacrificing for a leadership that could no longer protect them. Species that had once looked to the Council as a source of stability now saw them as the cause of chaos. News of humanity's victories spread, fueling a wave of dissent among planets once tightly controlled by the Council. Humanity had turned the Council's own people against them, using fear and doubt as effectively as any weapon. The Council's leadership, once proud and dismissive of humanity, now found themselves isolated, abandoned by allies who saw the writing on the wall. As the Council's forces dwindled, humanity seized the moment to deliver a final blow. A fleet of Earth's most advanced warships, outfitted with the best of human and alien technologies, moved toward the Council's central stronghold. This wasn't just another strike, it was a demonstration. Humanity's forces didn't aim to destroy the stronghold outright. They sought to capture it intact, to show the Council and the galaxy that they had not only defeated the Council militarily but had broken them completely. The Council's leaders, desperate and demoralized, had no choice but to surrender. The once mighty rulers of the galaxy, who had decreed that humans should never be allowed to start a war, were now at humanity's mercy. In a final act of symbolic power, humanity broadcast the Council's surrender across every communication channel in the galaxy. The leaders of the Council, humiliated and visibly shaken, acknowledged their defeat to billions of viewers. The message was clear and unambiguous. The galaxy's power structure had shifted, and humanity now held the reins. No longer would Earth's people be treated as an inferior species, no longer would they be underestimated or ignored. Humanity had fought not just to win but to ensure that no one would ever question their place in the galaxy again. With the Council's surrender, humanity set forth its terms. The galaxy would be restructured under a new order, one in which Earth's representatives would have a significant voice, where species could no longer claim superiority based on their technological prowess or their perceived place in galactic history. Reparations would be made, not only for the provocations that had sparked the conflict but for the centuries of unchecked control and exploitation that the Council had enforced. Resources, territories, and technologies would be shared, with a focus on unity and mutual defense, rather than control by a single authoritarian body. While the Council's remnants tried to protest, they had no power left to resist. Humanity's dominance was now unquestionable, and the Council leaders, once proud and dismissive, were forced to comply with the new structure. Earth's leaders, however, understood that victory was not only about control. They knew that the galaxy was watching, that other species, who had remained silent or neutral during the conflict, were now waiting to see how humanity would wield its newfound power. Humanity's leaders addressed these silent observers directly, assuring them that Earth's rise was not a path to domination, but a path to a fairer galaxy. The Council, broken and disgraced, was left to watch as humanity reshaped the galaxy, reclaiming territories and establishing new laws. Alien species that had once lived in fear of the Council's retribution now saw hope in humanity's rise. Planets that had been exploited for resources were given independence, while trade agreements were rewritten with fairness and mutual benefit in mind. The galaxy's power dynamics had shifted irreversibly, and humanity had not only seized control but had set a precedent that would shape the ages to come. The days of unchecked dominance and suppression were over. Yet, humanity's leaders knew that their position would always be under scrutiny. They had won the war, but they understood that the galaxy would never stop watching, waiting to see if Earth would fall into the same traps as the Council. To avoid this, they established a new alliance, a coalition of planets dedicated to maintaining peace and ensuring that no single species could ever impose its will on others. Humanity led this coalition, but with a structure that encouraged transparency, cooperation, and accountability. It was a galactic order built not on fear but on respect and mutual defense. As the years passed, humanity's story became a symbol of resilience, a reminder of what happens when the underestimated rise to power. The decree that had once forbidden humans from starting a war had ironically triggered their ascension, a fact that no species could ignore. The message was etched into history, shared in hushed tones across alien worlds, whispered as both warning and legend: never let humans start a war, because once they do, they will finish it, and they will leave no doubt about who holds the final word.